There was two big moments in The Promised Neverland that this first arc was going to be adapting that I couldn't wait to see when I heard that it was getting an anime announcement. The first of which was the reveal at the end of episode 1, because I knew, done in animation, that would be an incredibly frightening, intense situation, which it absolutely was. The second big one that I was really anticipating was when I first read the manga. The Gilda reveal in what you thought was going to be the traitor reveal, I thought was great in the manga, but I knew with a soundtrack, with animation, and the proper directing, that scene would be 100 times better in an anime, and it absolutely was. They knocked it out of the park with that Gilda scene. I can't tell you how happy I was watching this episode. Easily my favorite episode out of the past month of The Promised Neverland. Not to mention, they even dropped the Ray bombshell from Norman at the end of the episode, which I honestly thought it would be the start of episode 5 that they would drop something like that. I wasn't expecting Gilda and Ray in the same episode, but I was so happy that they nailed it. This episode was amazing. Yes, there was some inconsistencies with the visuals, of course, some unpolished character models, but in terms of the actual visual directing and the sound directing, the music was killing it. Gilda and Dawn are two pretty interesting characters. It's kind of interesting having an extra two added to this group who know what Mama and the rest are doing. So adding in that extra element while still not being totally sure who the traitor is, that's tense in itself. And I love how they first direct them kind of not buying into it. Of course, Gilda is, because Gilda knows how much Emma loves this family, how much they love their mother. There's no way Emma would lie, but Dawn is having a hard time believing that, because who would truthfully believe that your mother is selling you to demons to be sold off? No one's going to actually believe that. So his kind of like laughing and not taking it seriously, then getting mad, that's exactly how a kid should act in that situation. I'm glad that you do have a character like Dawn who does give you that perspective, and just seeing kind of the crushing defeat of like everything that we once knew is gone. Imagine living your entire life having this wonderful family, thinking your siblings are going off to a better place, and learning that essentially they could be up for grabs to be ate or something worse. There is that lie to keep them hopeful, to keep them on their side, that there's the possibility that their siblings are still alive. Of course, we know they aren't alive after what we saw in episode 1, but that lie that Norman was willing to tell them, which pissed off Ray, because giving that sense of security and false hope, that's eventually going to bite you in the ass. And I like the back and forth, because as you're watching this episode play out, you're thinking to yourself, it's got to be either one of these two or a kid we haven't focused on. They bring up the who can you really trust in this episode? But Norman, throughout this entire episode, he's realizing more and more who he really shouldn't trust. And I like how over the course of the episode, when you're focused on people like Gilda, where you're slowly approaching her, they're directing her to be very menacing. But in that situation, when I first read in the manga, and I'm sure most people who are fresh to this anime are going to think, it's gotta be Gilda. They direct her in a very villainous light, but because of everything that's happened, you feel so safe in assuming that this has to be the traitor, because at this moment, it just feels like the perfect time to reveal everything's going to shit. And that kind of Crone back and forth, Crone is really trying her best to get the info. Of course, Mama's saying, don't do anything, just play the part and I'll make sure you become a Mama in the future. Mama is a freaking mastermind. She knows she probably can't trust this girl, but she needs her to keep the harvest intact. The voice actors were killing it. Gilda breaking and almost shattering, but then snapping back, just saying, we had a fight, Emma and I, that's the only reason. The voice actors were killing it, but it was that build up with the music as she was approaching Crone's room. You see the note go under the door to Mama, you're like, oh shit, this has to be it. But then, oh, it wasn't Gilda? Then why is Gilda siding with Crone? Is there two traitors? Like, that entire build up, because it was done so perfectly in the anime form, with that build up of the music getting louder and louder, making you tense up like, oh my god, is she really the traitor? You were starting to like this character. Mama knows. Oh my god, Crone sabotaging too. Like, that was so perfectly executed, and it made me so happy, especially seeing Emma happy when she realizes that she isn't the traitor, especially after that heartwarming moment that they had before they went to bed. But then when you see kind of this kind of play that Norman was doing, giving Dawn and Gilda both two separate ways to determine who the traitor is, but then he sees, oh, it's got to be Dawn. Such an easy reveal, right? You know, the guy who was first not okay with believing that Mama was, you know, a bad person, and then he immediately just throws it in his face. It's gotta be you, isn't it, Ray? Now, I'm not gonna go into specifics with any more than what we saw in this episode, but that reveal and the shock look on Ray's face was so flawlessly done. Seriously, I love that, because this entire cast, the central three, are geniuses. They are. They all have their pros and cons. Emma is wanting to keep her family safe, and she says no matter what, even if they were a traitor, she can't believe anyone in her family is truly bad, which honestly is probably the case, because everyone is just trying to have a normal life. And when you have geniuses like Ray or Norman or Emma, whatever they do, there's got to be a reason for it. But then Emma's just like, you kind of want to say, well, maybe Emma is too naive. If someone is trading them out for their own self-gain, how can you still trust them? But it's because they're family and they weren't helping them being raised for cattle as far as she can tell. I like that because on one hand, you want to say Emma's right, but on the other, you're like, Emma, if you want to survive, you got to cut off the loose ends. But that's kind of the beauty of The Promised Neverland, especially in this first arc, is even when you see horrible things or you start to question what's happening, you always know in the back of your mind, whatever you think about a situation, the Gilda scene's a great representation. You think you know exactly what's happening, but then they turn it on their head. And that's what I like about The Promised Neverland, is because even when you think you understand a character or you understand a plot point, they usually shift it in a way that makes it completely different than what you were expecting. Ray is one of my favorite characters in this show. Also Sister Crone. Just what they do in this arc is absolutely incredible. And you're starting to see more and more why I like characters like Ray and also Sister Crone, because they just do things that shake up this cast and it always makes it entertaining. But I have to say, starting the episode off with Mama just kind of rocking Sister Crone's boat, being like, hey, don't do anything. I'm the mama. I'll make sure you're mama. I love how you can see how nervous she's getting. It's actually a pretty interesting contrast to how Sister Crone was shaking up Gilda, because it's almost identical, where you have this powerful authority looming over saying like, just tell me everything you know. If you got anything to confess, just trust me. And Mama did that to Crone at the beginning of the episode, but then Crone goes back, rips off the doll's head because she knows, she's like, I'm gonna sabotage this bitch. I absolutely hate her. And I like that. I like how in a course of an episode, you can see something where you have a character who's kind of being put in their place. Someone who has no power in one situation, but then, 15 minutes later, you see them doing the exact same thing that was applied to them, and now they're the looming threat over such a small character. I absolutely love it. The way this episode was directed, even if you if you ignore the inconsistencies with some of the character designs, just the way they were directing, especially like when they're creeping up the stairs, I'm pretty sure it was done in 3D to get that across. You're hearing the creaking of the footsteps. You're hearing just this ambient music in the background. It is so creepy and disturbing, and that's why this is such an effective horror and thriller anime, because it's not always trying to give you jump scares or make you tense up. It builds up to emotional and frightening reveals that naturally come across as frightening and terrifying, which most horror anime don't get right. But this is why The Promised Neverland, I think, can count as a horror anime, because they're not always trying to jump scare you. They're naturally building up to frightening situations where kids are realizing who they can and cannot trust, and you truthfully don't know, even when a reveal comes, if that is all there is to it. This episode, from a visual directing standpoint, was masterclass. The music was a very close second. I want to say the music was my favorite part, but just because how they handled that Gilda reveal, not to mention that quick Norman reveal saying like, it's you, isn't it, Ray? I can't say the audio surpassed that, but the audio was a very close second because the voice actors were killing it. I think Gilda was probably the star in this episode, especially because of how she was getting shook up by Sister Crone, but still came out on top being like, screw off, I'm fine, it's just a friend's quarrel. But that music was absolutely amazing. I think, honestly, coming out of this season, The Promised Neverland will probably have my favorite soundtrack of the season. I really like how they're executing it. It's surpassing everything that I can imagine, and just how they'll detail this almost positive energy coming off of some of these tracks in such a weird scene. It's somehow contrasts these scenes, but it actually works quite well, especially when Crone was kind of like freaking out after that mama shakeup at the beginning of the episode. The music feels so weird for that scene, but it almost feels so perfect all at the same time. Really, this is everything I want. I know some people have complained, the characters are talking out loud rather than thinking in their heads, and it makes it seem like they're a little too stupid. I personally like that change for the anime because they are still kids. As smart as they are, I like the idea that they are still kids, so they can make stupid mistakes. I just prefer them talking out loud, as it kind of makes you feel like you're included in the conversation rather than them just thinking in their head. But for anyone who did watch this episode, what did you think of episode 4? Was it your favorite episode like myself, or did you find it a little lackluster? Let me know whatever you thought down in that comment section below, and be sure to like the video if you did enjoy, and also hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. But until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.